The war in Vietnam is a combined and joint effort, whatever you are. Soldier, sailor, Marine, or airman, American, Korean, Arvin, Australian or New Zealander, you already know this well. A message read to this unit illustrates the challenges faced and met by units of all services.
I have a letter addressed to all personnel of this command from the commanding general. During our tour in the Republic of Vietnam, we have all seen what communism can do to a struggling nation in our world community. It is therefore most important that we conduct our affairs with the people of the Republic of Vietnam in a manner that will show the Vietnamese citizen that we are his friends and that we are here to assist him in the improvement as well as the security of his country. It is then with great pride that I note the fine work done by the soldiers of this command during the recent operation. It is with pleasure that I say, a job well done.
These men have just emerged from many long days of combat, during which they faced and fought the Viet Cong, drove him from areas which he had heretofore controlled, opened roads for travel which he had dominated, and thereby contributed substantially to the turning of the tide in Vietnam. Yet it is not for their military accomplishments alone, important though they are, that they are commended by their commander. It is for other activities, more subtle, less easy to grasp and define, yet every bit as indispensable to the final decision in the war that is being fought in Vietnam today, a war unique in the long history of armed conflict between men and nations. This is the story of the fighting man and his unit in Vietnam, defending against aggression. But more than that, this is the story of their special task, helping to build a nation at the grassroots level, among the people, in the villages. This is the battleground in Vietnam, the varied and changing face of the land. But this too is the battlefield, the villages and hamlets which dot the countryside, the communities across the land where 4/5 of the people live. And it is in this battlefield that the issue of victory or defeat will ultimately be decided. The reason is rooted in the special nature of the war that is being fought here. For this is a war whose objective is to win the hearts and the minds of the people. To understand why this is so, it is necessary to contrast this war with those we have fought in the past. Take Korea, for example. As in all the wars before it, it had a battle line. When the war was going against us, the battle line pushed in on us. When we were on the offensive, the movement of the battle line described the progress of our victory. In this normal kind of military situation, the other side of that line was known to be enemy territory. And tragic though it was a fact to be accepted that cities and towns lying in areas controlled by the enemy often had to suffer the cost of victory's advance. But the war in Vietnam is different. Although we do engage in conventional combat with well-organized North Vietnamese military units who support the Viet Cong guerrillas, our enemy here is active over most of the countryside, and rarely is there a conventional battle line. Our job here is to search him out wherever he hides, however he travels and supplies his forces, to seek him along all the avenues through which he infiltrates the Republic of Vietnam, carrying the weapons of his aggression. Our job is to find him, and then to destroy him. But because the enemy over here is fighting basically an unconventional war, he does not rely on holding terrain, but more importantly, the people. The foundation of unconventional war rests on the need for their support. In this kind of struggle, whoever has the people wins the war. So we must deny the enemy the popular support he has to have in order to survive. And more than that, we must enlist that popular support behind our own effort and behind the government of the Republic of Vietnam, whose cause we represent to the people through whose villages we travel and fight. So the issue turns on the people in their villages and hamlets, and these become the ultimate battlefields of the war, as we and the enemy both endeavor to win their support. As the war thus ebbs and flows through their lives and villages, the people themselves have little control over that constant movement. Nor, ironically, is the grave issue of the war, the threat to freedom which communist aggression poses, always clear to the people whose support will determine the ultimate decision. Their lives are lived at the edge of fundamental experiences, and it is the fundamentals with which they are concerned: poverty, hunger, disease, and a deep yearning to live in peace without fear, for they have known the trials of war now for many long years. Their allegiance will go, inevitably, to the side which most clearly demonstrates a sympathetic interest in those fundamental problems. The winning of their support, then, will take other weapons beyond those in our arsenal of firepower. It will take the intangible weapons of compassion and goodwill. In the early phase of the war, the Viet Cong proved themselves adept at using those weapons, simply by persuading the people that they were their friends and protectors who would help to bring them a better life. The real objectives of communism were always underplayed or obscured entirely. They're still doing that as much as they can. But one factor's changed the direction of the war significantly: the big buildup of American forces. With the buildup, the Viet Cong's hold on the countryside started to loosen. And as that has happened, the enemy has turned more and more to the use of terror and murder as a way of maintaining his grip on the people, hoping to intimidate. But to the people in the villages, there might well be little difference between the calculated cruelty of communist forces and fire which rains on them and their families from an American rifle or an American plane. These special demands of this special war place a particular responsibility on every American over here. Commanders at all levels are obliged to consider the psychological as well as the military objectives of each operation. And because the circumstances call for an exercise of restraint beyond that normally required on the battlefield, they must strike a balance between the force essential to accomplish their mission and the necessity of inflicting as few casualties as possible on the civilian population. This does not mean that the rules of safety and security can or should ever be relaxed. Every commander must always be able to accomplish his mission with the least loss to his own troops and the fewest possible restrictions on his planning and his freedom to fire and maneuver. Civilian population. For the blunt truth is that death or injury to helpless civilians, even when it is unavoidable, works against us. This knowledge is simply one of the conditions of war which we must accept and work with as best we can. This special responsibility extends all the way along the chain of command, on every level and in every service. And it very specifically includes the man on the ground, who must face his personal responsibility through the sights of his personal weapon. For this man's job carries him into the very heart of this unique battlefield. Precautions to eliminate needless casualties should be taken whenever possible. One example of how this can effectively be accomplished is the Air Force's practice of carefully marking targets so they can be hit with pinpoint accuracy. Another is the dropping of leaflets to warn civilians of the military vulnerability of their area or of impending airstrikes. And still another is the use of broadcasts to warn villagers of ground operations. All such warnings, of course, must always be made with due regard given to the security and success of the mission.
Và đừng đi ra khỏi nhà mình vì sẽ tai hại, rất tai hại đến cho mình. Và trong lúc chờ đợi xin đồng bào cứ ở yên trong nhà và sẽ có những thông cáo cho đồng bào. Xin đồng bào hãy tuân theo những thông cáo của.
The villages have to be entered. They have to be searched and made safe. This remains an inescapable duty of war. But with careful plans made and executed, with every precaution taken that can be within the bounds of safety, and with every man aware of his own increased responsibility, it can be done with the least possible damage and danger. Operations planned in coordination with the country's province or district chiefs help smooth the path the rest of the way. For they can explain better than anyone else, at least in the beginning, that the Americans are here as friends.
Quân đội Mỹ đến đây để giúp đỡ cho đồng bào. Vậy đồng bào phải ráng cố gắng để mà họ làm sao để mà xứng đáng với cái việc và người Mỹ để giúp đỡ mình để mà
As friends, that's how we come to the villages of Vietnam, how we must come if we're going to win this war. Friendship is one of the most basic gifts a man can offer. It is built on the desire really to know people. Look around you and look deeply to understand what Vietnam and its people are like. Vietnam is an old country with a recorded history that goes back more than 2,000 years. Its traditions and its customs are ancient and deeply cherished. The Vietnamese himself, humble peasant though he may be, is the inheritor of this old tradition, and anyone who would claim his friendship must understand that about him. He must know and respect the fact that he looks on the world in a very set way, defined and shaped by long tradition. It is a world that lies always close to the soil and the elements. His village is more than his home. It is his universe, and he seldom, if ever, leaves it. The values which shape his code of behavior are his most precious possessions, and they are honored ones. Dignity, self-control, respect for elders. His family is all important to him, all his family. Not only those immediately close to him, but distant relatives as well. Those living, those dead, and those in generations yet to come. Regard for the family is the center of his religion. Although many villages in Vietnam like this one are Christian, the majority are Buddhist. Whichever it is, the place of worship in the village is the focal point of community life. Knowing these things about the Vietnamese people and understanding the importance they have in their lives will help in establishing the friendship that is so crucial to our mission, since knowledge is the foundation of friendship. Beyond endeavoring to know and understand the Vietnamese, there is much more we can do.
Ready? One again, okay? One, two, three, four, airborne! All the way!
The ease with which the American fighting man establishes rapport with the children in the lands through which he travels is an enduring part of his legend. There is no mystery about it, for the hungry language of childhood is universal, and men at war have known for generations that candy and chewing gum bring smiles and warm the hearts of children in any land. But there is more to this legend than candy and color. And every man knows it who has watched happiness brighten the eyes of a child as the result of his own effort. It does not always happen quickly. Even a child's friendship is sometimes slow to come. And how much more true this is of people who have known bitterly only the brutality of war and warriors, and who can escape only behind thick walls of silence and suspicion. Their friendship is not obtained easily, but with patience and effort, it can be won. A civic action plan supports every military operation. Not because we believe that friendship has a price which we can pay with giveaways and handouts, but because we thus have the opportunity to show in a definite, tangible way that our interests really lie with the people and their problems. Sometimes clothing supplied by the various aid agencies are often as important to take on combat operations as any other kind of cargo. They are not lightly given, nor are they lightly received. To people who live always on the edge of want, whose days blend into a continuing challenge to wrest enough from the earth to still their children's hunger, such gifts are deeply important. And the gesture of giving becomes deeply meaningful. To people whose lives are shadowed and haunted by disease, who must suffer pain and illness because no help for suffering is available to them, whose health and well-being are doomed to the harsh conditions of a harsh life. To such a people, the attentions of a military medical team are powerful symbols indeed of a desire for friendship. Even soap, in a community which has none, and therefore is vulnerable to the ravages that such a simple item can prevent, becomes a weapon with almost magic powers. Every military unit has the capability of helping to improve a community in some way. Simple construction materials, for instance, and a little paint, and a few hours' work can pay rich and lasting dividends. Particularly work done side by side with the people themselves. For the Vietnamese people are both proud and industrious. They welcome our assistance. And together we can accomplish much. A new community meeting center, place for the children to go to school. A new face for the house of worship. A well, a bridge. These can work for us with wonderful effect. Helping the people to gather in their precious rice crop and protect it from the Viet Cong, as these Marines are doing, can be as important as any military engagement. For all this is evidence which will stand as lasting reminders that the Americans who came this way as allies of their government came as friends. Establishing friendships in the villages of Vietnam can also produce tangible results. Intelligence information, for instance, which could save your life. The war we wage in Vietnam today is slow and hard and grinding. From the storehouse of our nation's power, we are bringing to it the might with which we can eventually destroy the enemy's strength. From reservoirs of compassion and generosity, we bring a spirit and a demonstration of friendship, and these too become weapons, as powerful as any other in this war, which is a contest for the hearts and the minds of the people of Vietnam. They are weapons that will touch and stir the hopes of those through whose villages we travel, and when we pass on, will leave a deposit of warm feelings behind. A demonstration of the people's new appreciation for us in any one village cannot perhaps be taken too seriously. It may not mean that the village has been secured forever. The war is not that simple, but we must not falter. We must continue until the enemy is convinced his aggression will not pay. And hand in hand with the fighting in Vietnam, we must press ahead with the crucial task of helping to build a nation, all the way to the heart and soul of the smallest hamlet.
Early in 1964, a new U.S. strategy began to unfold in Vietnam. It was written in the vapor trails that crossed the Pacific sky. Vapor trails that began at air bases in the Pacific, at tactical air command bases in the United States. Vapor trails formed by sleek Air Force jets. Muscle to build up our air strength. The situation made it imperative that we be ready to strike back. This was the United States Air Force, showing the versatility that was to make it such a vital factor in the Vietnam theater. Air-to-air refueling made it possible to deploy aircraft swiftly and efficiently. Soon, F-100 Super Sabres were setting down on the runways at Da Nang and Tan Son Nhut, while 2 squadrons of twin-jet B-57s went to Bien Hoa. The buildup of U.S. air power was underway. The buildup included the many additional services that must accompany a fighter-bomber force. More troops and cargo carriers. More rescue aircraft. More gear. More maintenance men. More equipment. More munitions. Expanded communications facilities and new air bases. But the jets were not to see action right away. For a time, the situation remained relatively static. Then, the communists blew the lid off, literally. These direct attacks against U.S. forces, together with the growing number of atrocities committed by the Viet Cong, caused the U.S. to take a long, hard look at Vietnam. What it saw was ominous. The enemy roamed almost at will in the dense jungles, using tactics learned in almost 20 years of unceasing guerrilla warfare. The same tactics that had cost the French 100,000 casualties and sent them down to final defeat at Dien Bien Phu in 1954. The Viet Cong controlled much of South Vietnamese territory into which they moved in men and supplies, virtually unhampered, along a vast logistic network, the notorious Ho Chi Minh Trail. It was obvious that without massive assistance, South Vietnam would fall, and it would be only a matter of time until all of Southeast Asia would be faced with the prospect of a communist invasion. Only hours after the Pleiku attack, the National Security Council passed a resolution authorizing airstrikes in North Vietnam. Within 2 days, U.S. airmen and pilots of the fledgling South Vietnamese Air Force launched strikes against military targets north of the demilitarized zone. Soon afterward, in a companion action, Air Force jets at Tan Son Nhut, Da Nang, and Bien Hoa were unleashed in South Vietnam. There were now, in fact, 2 air wars underway in embattled Vietnam. North of the 17th parallel, the emphasis was on cutting supply lines. South of the parallel, the action was more varied, but close air support of ground forces received the major effort. Now, the pace of the build-up redoubled. Additional squadrons of aircraft were deployed to Vietnam in a trans-Pacific migration of unprecedented scale. New airfields sprang into being with amazing speed. New launch bases for the ever-growing swarm of military aircraft. New logistics bases for the increasing demands of our ground forces. 69 days after the start of construction, operational aircraft began landing at Cam Ranh Bay. The interim facilities, built on a sandy coastal peninsula, now house a tactical fighter wing, an aerial port, and a vast logistics complex. Phan Rang is the home of another tactical fighter wing. These are but a few of the many primary, secondary, and P-patch air facilities hustled into existence in response to the need for more air power. Built by methods unique to our military engineers, much of this construction will be of permanent use to the Vietnamese people. Administration of the rapidly growing aerial armada was already well established. Pacific Air Forces, the air element of the Unified Pacific Command, is responsible for directing and supporting the bulk of Air Force activities in the Pacific. The hub of this vast command is headquartered at Hickam Air Force Base, Hawaii, linked to the Vietnam Theater of Operations by an ultra-modern communication system, keeping the PACAF commander abreast of happenings throughout the Pacific. This Air Force-operated communications network not only ties PACAF headquarters to its Pacific air bases and the United States mainland, but also allows for direct contact between this control center at Hickam and strike aircraft. Thus, a strike force headed for a North Vietnamese target is enmeshed in a communications web, the heart of which is the on-scene command in South Vietnam, located at Tan Son Nhut Air Base, headquarters of the U.S. 7th Air Force. Here, the result of the air power buildup is very much in evidence. While overall direction of Air Force operations in the Pacific is normally handled by PACAF headquarters, the 7th Air Force commander and his staff are responsible for the tactical forces employed in the Vietnam combat theater. Because Tan Son Nhut is frequently within earshot of the falling bombs, the cold facts of the regular briefings take on an added significance.
Was a ground report. In Tally Ho, 101 sorties were flown. The 53 add-ons were 32 F-105s, 4 F-4Cs, and 17 U.S. Navy aircraft from out-country resources.
The figures are constantly changing. At this moment, they are about to be updated.
Dave, I've got our final IP at 12 o'clock, 5 miles.
The combined U.S. and Vietnamese Air Force's Tactical Air Control Center at Tan Son Nhut Airfield provides the 7th Air Force commander with a system for centralized control of his air resources, geared for quick response to all requirements. Detailed control is delegated to the direct air support centers which direct all air activity in their respective areas.
Tally ho, I've got the target at 1 o'clock. Roger.
Control of air activity over the extremely fluid battlefronts in Vietnam is given added flexibility by the airborne battlefield command control centers now being used. The heart of the system is a boxcar-sized package of communications and observation gear, which fits readily into a C-130 aircraft for airborne operations, or can be flown into a forward area and set up on the ground in 3 hours or less. The ABCCC is a versatile performer. Among its capabilities are the direction of joint air-ground operations, control of direct air support, the provision of airborne communications during special strikes, and command of air rescue activities. It can also serve as an alternate command post when fixed command facilities are under attack or when other communications break down. Air superiority is a decisive factor in prosecuting a successful war. And the first requirement for air superiority is control of the air, which includes protection of our own air bases from enemy air attack. The communists have not yet mounted such an attack, though they have that capability. Should they ever attempt to do so, we have the air defenses to deal with them. Jet fighters are constantly on an alert status at bases in South Vietnam. Powerful radars search the sky, and reconnaissance aircraft keep a wary eye on enemy airfields in the north. If the enemy should make an offensive move, the reaction would be swift. Within minutes, the interceptors are on their way. In the instances over North Vietnam where Red MiGs have challenged them, our aircraft and air crews have proven to be vastly superior. Target selection at the national level requires accurate intelligence, and much of this responsibility is borne by reconnaissance aircraft. Air Force jets carry supersonic eyes and ears over enemy territory, obtaining weather information as well as target selection, pre-strike and bomb damage assessment photography. RB-66 pilots also served as pathfinders for strike aircraft attacking targets in the north. The RF-4C is the newest Air Force reconnaissance aircraft. It is equipped for day and night photography, radar mapping, and other important functions. Nothing is immune from the prying cameras. Not even the enemy's ground-to-air missile sites, where the blinding speed of these supersonic jets flying at low levels catches the Reds napping. The conduct of this type of air war involves much more than bombing and strafing attacks, particularly in the guerrilla environment we are facing in Vietnam. One tactic the enemy has used to great advantage is the ambush. From hiding places in the dense forests, he has been able to spring deadly traps on Allied troops and convoys, and then vanish into the jungle like the drops of a monsoon rain. This kind of attack is being made increasingly difficult by spraying a non-toxic type of weed killer on the jungle growth bordering special forces camps, important road routes, and likely ambush areas. One small group of Air Force pilots is fighting another kind of warfare, the battle for men's minds. Their only weapons are 2 loudspeakers, a tape recorder, and bundles of multicolored leaflets. The leaflets and the voice broadcasts are designed to influence the Viet Cong and their sympathizers to defect. Some warn civilians to leave a military target area scheduled for attack. The value of these psychological warfare missions can be judged by the hot ground fire that greets the tiny unarmed U-10 aircraft, and by the many defectors who turn up following each flight. The Viet Cong are noted for their primitive resourcefulness, but the enemy holds no copyright on improvisation. Yankee ingenuity is also at work in this war. The old C-47, known to pilots around the world as the cargo and troop-carrying Goonie Bird, has been reincarnated as a dragon ship with a truly fearful bite. Equipped with 3 6-barreled Gatling guns, each capable of firing up to 6,000 rounds per minute, one AC-47 can tear acres of jungle into a tossed green salad in no time at all. Air supremacy is of particular benefit to air rescue crews, who have saved several hundred downed airmen since the war began. With possibility of attacks from the air reduced, crews can concentrate on the mission at hand. A smoke marker, a radio signal, a dye stain in the sea. These are the clues that lead the rescue team to the scene. The crew works fast and efficiently. The elements and the enemy are grim contenders for the life of the downed man. Assault airlift forces have made indispensable contributions to the Allied effort in Vietnam. Since only 20% of the roads in the South are under government control, airlift has become the civil and military lifeline. Airborne assault. Airdrops of munitions and supplies to inaccessible areas. Deliveries to remote areas. Evacuation of the wounded. Relocation of refugees are daily combat support missions. Long-range, high-speed strategic airlift forces move high-priority material, personnel, and complete units across the Pacific to the battlefront. An Army Brigade task force was airlifted from Hawaii to Pleiku in Vietnam. The movement involved approximately 3,000 troops and 5,000 tons of equipment, airlifted over a 6,000-mile route, averaging 1 departure or arrival every 2 hours and 45 minutes during the period of deployment. Troops airlifted by the giant jet transports can be ready to engage the enemy within mere hours after they leave their bases, even distant bases. But air mobility pays off in many other ways. It not only gets the troops there, it helps them to stay there. In the South, there are no well-defined battle lines. The enemy hits and runs. As often as not, he looks and dresses exactly like the friendlies, and his attacks are vicious. This kind of warfare calls for a heavy reliance on air support. Very close air support. Force has called on some of its most experienced pilots to act as air liaison officers and forward air controllers. Flying over the hottest action in pint-sized S1E8 Bird Dog aircraft and from ground positions in radio-equipped jeeps, their performance has become one of the fabled stories of the war.
3-5, you in a left-hand orbit?
Negative, let's go straight ahead. I'll go into a left-hand orbit now.
Okay, we got you inside.
Okay, keep me inside and I'll go up here and I'll mark the target whenever you're ready. I'd like the first bomb just north of my smoke, about 100 meters. That's just a couple different widths.
Okay. 3-5, we got any friendlies in the air?
Roger, nearest friendlies are 2,000 meters to the west.
Okay.
You still have my smoke?
I got your smoke still, right. Madam 2-1, set them up hot in pairs. 2, Roger.
That looks pretty good. I'd like you to keep your passes as steep as possible and be especially vigilant for helicopters. Roger, I got it, and I'm rolling in.
The forward air controllers live and work with the Vietnamese and with U.S. ground forces in the field. They become thoroughly familiar with the local people and with the countryside in their assigned area. They fly daily reconnaissance missions, and they direct airstrikes from first-hand knowledge of the conditions that exist under the screen of jungle foliage. So accurate is their guidance that hard-pressed ground commanders often ask for airstrikes within mere yards of their own lines. Should darkness cloud the issue, the FAC has another trick up his sleeve. He calls for a flare mission, and within minutes, help is on the way. Like cosmic searchlights, brilliant 750,000 candle power flares drift eerily earthward, depriving the attackers of the cover of night and lighting the way for the fighter bombers. The giant B-52 has also been used effectively against Viet Cong troop and supply strongholds throughout South Vietnam. The air war in the north is far removed from the mud, sweat, and blood of the ground fighting, but it is no less savage. Here, slamming speed is the keynote, and aerial interdiction the main objective. Interdiction, by definition, to prohibit. In war, it means attacking the enemy's lines and sources of supply. Purpose? To starve his fighting forces by denying them food, arms, reinforcements. The steady pressure of aerial interdiction in the north is not only blunting the point of the offensive in the south, it is inexorably weakening the whole economy of the communist north. Air Force fighters and bombers are logging thousands of strike sorties each month, dropping thousands of tons of bombs on bridges, ferries, roads, railway lines, highways and tunnels, troop staging areas, munition depots, missile sites, fuel storage depots, and many other strategic targets. On June 29, 1966, the shape of the war in the north assumed a new dimension. The long arm of U.S. air power reached into the very heart of communist North Vietnam when U.S. Air Force planes delivered a message from the free nations supporting the cause of the beleaguered South Vietnamese. The message echoed the words of our president. Quote, "The air attacks on military targets in North Vietnam have imposed and will continue to impose a growing burden and a high price on those who wage war against the freedom of others. Our purpose is to convince North Vietnam that this kind of aggression is too costly and cannot succeed. Until the day they decide to end this aggression and to make an honorable peace, we will carry on." End quote. Modern air power accuracy makes pinpoint bombing of military targets possible. It makes possible the wrecking of the Red War machine and the strangling of the communist economy. The president has left no doubt in the minds of friend or enemy that the new pattern of persuasion will continue until the North Vietnamese come to the conference table. The United States Air Force, Navy, Army, and Marine Corps are investing their power, experience, and determination behind this objective. It is answering the communist challenge in the only way the ruthless enemy can understand, by setting an intolerable price on his effort to prolong the fight. This is the Air Force contribution to victory in Vietnam and to final peace.